Welcome to Love Your Life After Divorce, the podcast where you'll learn everything you need to know to rebuild your life after divorce from the inside out. Let's dive in. Hey there, friends. I hope you all are doing wonderful. I am finally recovering from COVID. It was a bit of a rough go. It was the first time I've ever had it, and man, it was rough. So I still have a little bit of congestion. I still don't feel like my voice is completely normal, but I'm glad that I'm feeling better. So today I want to talk to you about your marriage and divorce story. You may have not thought of it that way before, but I just want you to imagine that someone you're getting to know or a friend that you're going deeper with asks you, "What happened in your marriage?" or "Why did you get a divorce?" You probably have a version that you've rehearsed mentally that you typically share with people. You may have some phrases to explain it, like "we just grew apart," or "he was a cheater," or "a narcissist." Have you ever thought about how you tell your story? We all try to make sense of the way our marriages unfolded and ended. So we come up with a narrative based on the facts as a way to make sense of what happened for ourselves and to communicate it to other people. So, what I want to share with you today is that the way you define and describe what happened in your marriage and divorce matters a lot. You may think you're just sharing what happened, but I'm going to show you today that most of what you say about your marriage and divorce is actually an interpretation, and it's just one way to view it. Now, I'm not trying to say that you are intentionally skewing the truth or misleading yourself or other people. But whether you realize it or not, you are telling one version of the story, and it may not be the version that's most beneficial or helpful for you. This is important because a lot of times we tell some really painful stories. We cling on to these stories about our marriages and divorces that make us feel awful. So, if the way that you think about and tell your divorce story causes you a lot of pain, I want you to know that you can rewrite it. Now, this doesn't mean that you're changing the facts or that you're being dishonest about the way things went down. It doesn't mean that you're ignoring painful things that happened or looking at the past with rose colored glasses. This is not about sticking your head in the sand or being Pollyanna. However, it does mean that you think about and tell your divorce story in a way that serves you well, that allows you to find acceptance and peace. It means that you focus on what you learned, how you've grown, or the positive aspects of how your marriage ended. Yes, there are definitely positive aspects, but you may not see them right now. I have a really helpful, eye opening exercise that I do with my clients where we separate out the facts of their divorce from their thoughts about the facts. I'm not going to get into the details of the exercise, but what I do is I go through my clients' divorce stories with them and I help them rewrite the story in an accurate but helpful way. So, I want to give you some examples of the difference between the facts of a divorce story and someone's interpretation of the facts. So, a fact is a cold, hard truth, something that no one would disagree with, something that you and your ex and all your friends and your kids would all hear you say and 100% agree. So, here are some examples of cold, hard facts. We were married for 17 years. We went to marriage counseling 2 different times during our marriage. It took 1 year for our divorce to be finalized. We have 4 kids and have 50-50 custody. We have always celebrated our kids' birthdays and Christmas together. I cried when I signed the divorce papers. So, all of these specific sentences give a very true and factual bit of information about my own divorce. Actually, these are very true for me. And so I just want to show you that these kinds of statements are cold, hard facts, right? That no one could disagree with. Now, here are some interpretations of the facts that I just shared with you. I stayed in an unhappy marriage for way too long. When we went to marriage counseling, things got a little bit better for a short amount of time, and then they went back to the way things were, so counseling didn't really help. The year that it took to get a divorce was the absolute worst year of my life. It's awful not seeing my kids half the time. My ex and I get along really well, and I love that we spend the kids' birthdays and Christmas together. Even though I knew divorce was best for me, I never wanted to get a divorce. So I just want to point out that there are lots of different interpretations for all of the facts in your marriage and divorce story and in mine. So I just want to take the very first one that I shared with you to show you this. The very first thing I said was that I was married for 17 years. So here are some things that I could make that mean. Here are some interpretations of that. I could say, I wasted 12 years of my life because I knew after 4 years of marriage that I wasn't happy. I could also think I was scared to really tell the truth and didn't believe that my needs mattered. Or I could think something like, I was really committed to staying married and I tried for many years to make it work. So, do you see the difference in these different thoughts that I've just shared with you? They are all interpretations of the basic fact that I was married for 17 years. But there are a lot of options of what I can make that mean and how I choose to view the fact that I was married for 17 years. Now, here are some examples of really unhelpful or painful things that I have heard women say about their marriages or their divorces. I wasted years of my life. I was his prisoner. He threw me away like trash. He never loved me. It was all a lie. I'm so stupid to have stayed with him for as long as I did. I'll never find another love like we had. He's moved on with a better version of me. So, as you can probably see, these kinds of statements create a lot of pain for women. And honestly, they're not even factually true. They're just opinions or interpretations. And this means that they're optional. Women don't have to think things like this. Instead of thinking, I wasted years of my life, instead, you can think, I tried really hard for years to make the marriage last. Instead of thinking, I was his prisoner, you could think, he tried hard to control me, but I got away. Instead of, he threw me away like trash, you could think, he doesn't see how amazing I am and he's missing out. So I hope you can see the subtle shift in the examples that I just shared with you. We aren't changing the facts or pretending that things didn't happen the way we did. We're just choosing to look at it in a way that's more empowering and that doesn't feel so devastating. So if you have a thought about your marriage or your divorce that feels like a dagger through your heart or a punch in the gut, then that's a good clue or indication that it's time to change that thought if you indeed want to feel better, which I'm assuming you do. So now I'm going to give you two very concrete examples of how to rewrite your divorce story. I'm going to read you two versions of my marriage and divorce story. I'm going to start with the very first version that I initially believed and wrote about when I first got a divorce. And then I'll show you how I rewrote the story to make it more helpful for me so that I can move on with more peace and acceptance. Now, I am being super open and vulnerable here, which is kind of scary. But at the same time, I really think my story might help some of you. And so I'm just willing to put it all out there. And I have to tell you that when I was typing this out, it brought me to tears. Like I had to pause writing this story and just cry for a minute. And that's how painful it was for me to go through all of this. So hopefully I won't I won't break down and cry as I'm reading it to you now. So here we go. Right before I met my ex-husband, I was steeped in Christian purity culture. I read a popular book on Christian dating at the time and clung on to its teachings as the right way to date. I believed that if I followed all the rules, was very sexually pure, and put God at the center of my relationship, then I would choose the right person to marry and we would have an amazing marriage that lasted forever. I was naive and blind. I put all my focus on our shared faith when I met my ex-husband. I was a people pleaser and a rule follower, and I didn't put much stock into my own needs or desires. I was taught, in fact, that my own desires were sinful, and I believed it. I prayed a lot for God to lead and guide me and show me what to do. So I often interpreted things that happened in my life as God's will. When I was dating my ex husband, I had been praying and praying, asking God to show me if I should marry him or not. So when he proposed, I took that as a sign and I said yes, even though I had doubts that we were right for each other. We had a solid friendship, and I believed he was a good person. We were on exactly the same page with our Christian faith, and so I thought that was all that really mattered. I thought I was being mature and spiritual. Now, out of respect for my ex husband, I won't go into details, but it was challenging for me throughout our marriage to go from being super sexually pure before getting married to then being expected to please my husband in the bedroom. Now, when we had our first child, about a year and a half after we got married, our relationship dynamics shifted, and we both put more focus on our son than we did our own relationship. I stayed home full time, and he worked full time, so we each took on separate roles. And that's when the disconnection gradually started. But the main thing that started the unraveling of our relationship was my ex husband telling me that his faith had drastically changed. This was about 4 years after we were married. I was devastated. I felt blindsided, betrayed by God and my ex husband. I knew my ex husband hadn't purposefully misled me or changed on purpose, so I tried to be understanding, but I was so angry and I felt lost and alone. This wasn't the marriage relationship I had signed up for, and I wanted out, but I didn't think it was a good enough reason to get a divorce. I was taught that adultery was the only biblical reason for divorce, and so I stayed, but I felt trapped and unhappy. So I just put all of my focus on being the best mom I could be. I tried to find joy and fulfillment in things like my friendships, working out, doing all the things I thought I should do as a wife and a stay at home mom. Now, there were two different times in our marriage that I suggested we go to marriage counseling. He agreed to go, and things got slightly better each time, but it didn't last, and we would slip back into our normal dynamic of being disconnected. When we lost our spiritual connection, there just wasn't a lot left. We didn't argue, he didn't treat me badly, so I just thought I had to make the best of it. But I really felt like I was just slowly dying inside. Then we decided to take a tropical vacation with two other couples. I was excited and optimistic because we hadn't taken a trip without our kids in about 10 years. I was hoping that we could rekindle something, but the trip actually had the opposite effect. We enjoyed doing different things on the trip. I didn't feel close or connected to him. However, I did feel more alive and free personally than I had in years. I realized that I had been pushing my needs and desires down for years. I absolutely loved being a mom, but it was also draining because I was always serving and pouring myself out by taking care of other people. So on that vacation, it literally felt like I woke up to myself. The scales fell off my eyes. I could see the truth of the situation. It just hit me like a ton of bricks that I no longer wanted to be in the relationship with my husband. I didn't feel like my true self when I was with him. This realization was terrifying and exhilarating all at the same time. I talked to one of my best friends who was on the trip with us, and she was supportive and understanding. It didn't surprise her that I felt this way because she had known me for our whole lives and saw what my marriage relationship was like. Now, here's the part of the story that I wish I could change, but it happened, and it's an integral part of the story, so I'll share it with you all. On the last day of the trip, I initiated a kiss with one of the workers at the resort. I stupidly thought that it was a relatively safe way to explore my physical desires because I would never see or talk to this man again, and maybe it would give me some kind of clarity about my relationship with my husband. Instead, it was the beginning of the most toxic, awful relationship of my life. I will share more about this in later episodes, but that's all I'm going to say for now about that. So, when we got home from the trip, I met separately with our marriage counselor. We were already going to marriage counseling at the time and just talked to her about how I was feeling and what I had realized on the trip, and that I really thought I wanted a divorce, and I was asking her advice about it. So, I waited a few weeks. I thought a lot about it, and then I had a conversation with my ex-husband just about how unhappy I was and that I was pretty sure I wanted a divorce. We kept going to marriage counseling and went on some dates, tried to reconnect, but a switch had been flipped in my mind and I just couldn't turn it back on. I was incredibly anxious and depressed for the next year while we went through the divorce. I knew I didn't want to be in a relationship with my ex husband, but I also didn't want a divorce. So I just felt so stuck. I cried every single day. I felt like my life was falling apart. Sorry, I did get emotional there. Oh, goodness. Okay, so once I moved out and started working and figuring out the direction for my life, I started to feel better. Things slowly worked out, one step at a time. I wrestled, though, with a lot of guilt and shame about the divorce, and especially the exit affair I had. I never thought that I would be divorced, and I hated being away from my kids. But now I've worked through the guilt and shame, and I've really accepted being divorced. So that's how I naturally told my marriage and divorce story. Now, if you're not religious at all, or you're not familiar with conservative religions, then my story may seem really weird to you. It may not make much sense, but I'm guessing that some of you grew up in a similar way and that you can really relate. So I just really hope that by me sharing this story, it helps you know that you're not alone. So now I'm going to share the new version of my marriage and divorce story that I rewrote after I learned about the option of deciding what to think on purpose and to frame my story in a way that helped me feel peaceful and content and accepting. Now, it's not drastically different, but it's definitely framed differently. So as I read this version of the story, I just want you to see if you can spot the differences. Before I got married, I felt very strongly about my relationship with God and my Christian faith. My ex husband and I pursued our relationship through this lens. We were sincere, earnest, genuine, and had pure intentions. When we dated, we were respectful of each other. We communicated well and developed a strong friendship. My main criteria for a spouse was a spiritual leader, and my ex husband checked that box in a major way. When we had our first child, we put a lot of focus and effort into being good parents. We read books and we discussed how we wanted to discipline and raise our kids. We were on the same page and took parenting very seriously. 4 years into our marriage, my ex husband had a major change in his faith. I tried my best to support him and not judge him. I knew he was on his own path, even though I was really sad and disappointed that we were no longer aligned. I didn't feel as connected to him, but didn't consider divorce as an option. I also went through some changes in my own faith, and we had a lot of discussions about what we both thought and how our beliefs were changing. We were never mean or disrespectful to each other. We always tried our best to understand each other and communicated well. As the years went by, we had 3 more kids, and we parented really well together. He was a very loving, involved dad. We never had big disagreements about anything. There wasn't a lot of negativity between us, but there also wasn't a lot of positivity either. We were pretty distant emotionally and physically. I wasn't satisfied with our relationship and would periodically bring up things that I wished were different. I suggested counseling a few times, and my ex husband willingly participated. It helped some, but we never really got reconnected like we were when we first got married. We ended up taking a tropical vacation with 2 other couples, and I really rediscovered myself on that trip. I felt so alive, free, adventurous, and happy. I remembered that I was a human being, not just a wife and a mom. My ex and I didn't enjoy doing the same types of things on the trip. And I realized that our kids would one day grow up and move out of the house, and it would just be the 2 of us. I thought about the fact that I only have one life to live and that I deserve to be happy and fulfilled. I did not want to hurt my ex or my kids, so I really wrestled with the decision of whether to get a divorce or not. I had been trying for years to figure out a way to be happy and content, and when I finally gave myself permission to end the marriage, I knew it's what I really wanted. It was a very rough time, but once I moved out and started working and figuring out the direction for my life, I started to feel better. Things slowly worked out one step at a time. I started reconnecting with myself, figuring out who I really was and what I really wanted. I went to therapy, I worked with a life coach, and eventually I became a life coach myself. I did the hard work of peeling back the layers and becoming the most authentic and genuine version of myself I've ever been. I think that my ex and I both wanted our marriage relationship to be better, and we tried hard to make it work. But the truth is, we are just two different people, and we aren't compatible as a married couple. But we are really good at being friends and co parents, and I am incredibly thankful for that. So I hope you can tell as you listen to those two different versions of my marriage and divorce story that you can see the differences there and just how I framed it in the second version. Like even just reading it, I felt peaceful. I felt content. I felt settled. Just framing it that way and describing it in the way I did makes me feel a lot better. And it makes me feel at peace with the decision and at peace with how things went. And I could have even said more. Like, even right now, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking, I wouldn't trade my 4 kids for anything in the world. It was 100% worth being married to my ex-husband for 17 years, going through all the hard times that we went through, going through the pain, all of it. It was all worth it to have the 4 amazing children I have. That alone makes me thankful for my marriage. And so I really hope that just hearing me give my very honest, vulnerable, open account of, my marriage and divorce and seeing the 2 different ways that I approached it and can think of it, I hope that this gives you insight and gives you an idea of how you can do the exact same thing for yourself. Like I said before, if the way you tell your marriage and divorce story causes you a lot of pain and suffering, you do have an option to change it. You can decide to think of it differently, to tell the story differently, to understand how it all unfolded in a different way. If you need help with this, if you want to talk through this, I would love to meet with you. I offer a free session for everyone who is interested in just talking about where they are right now, about where you want to go in the future, how you want to feel instead of how you're feeling now. I would love to talk with you through that, to work with you through that. And if you decide to work with me in my 12-week program, then doing this very specific exercise that I mentioned earlier and going through this process of retelling your divorce and marriage story is a really cool experience that a lot of my clients have definitely enjoyed. It helps you reframe, it helps you remember your divorce and marriage in a way that can bring you more peace and contentment. It helps you accept it. It helps you to have clarity. It helps you to move forward instead of staying stuck in that painful story. So I'm going to put the link to sign up for a free session with me in the description of this podcast episode. I would honestly love to meet with you and hear your marriage and divorce story and then give you some pointers and help you see that you can view it in a different way. Because having peace, moving forward from divorce, telling your story in a way that brings you closure is so very important. I hope you guys have a great week. And I will talk to you next week. Did you know that there are 5 distinct stages to healing after divorce? Which stage are you currently in? And how can you successfully move to the next stage? Find out by getting the free roadmap so you can heal and move on faster after divorce. Simply go to my website, angiewilsoncoaching.com, and click Get the Free Roadmap.